American University in Bulgaria.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming at our experimental Balkansky Panizza Institute for Advanced Studies seminar. It's thought to be a co-teaching event that will combine what would be the mandatory knowledge embedded in the syllabi of my course and Professor Goksoy course, and hopefully we will able to show you how these models and frameworks of analysis are actually very useful for practice and how they are informed by the most recent research that will be presented by our guest speaker. Our guest speaker is Jana Schmutzler. She is visiting from Germany. She is at Bergische Universität Wuppertal. And the way this session will go will be as follows. First, I will present the first part of our talk about the influence of the environment on business with a special attention to culture. And then Professor Goksoy will take the same topic and will link it through the organizational reality. And further, Professor Schmutzler will take the same line of thought and will provide us with the most recent insights about how culture influences entrepreneurial intentions and business creation. So the underlying topic will be the environment and one aspect of it, culture. And I will start with presenting one analytical tool that actually informs strategic decision-making regarding the environmental analysis. And as I have mentioned to you, I will start presenting one tool. This tool is called PESTEL. So what does PESTEL do for you as future managers at different kinds of organizations? Well, PESTEL will give you some very good understanding about the macro/national environment of a country where you want to be active, because it will provide a full profile for this macroeconomic environment. Why do you need this? Because eventually you want to have a feeling and understanding of the opportunities and threats in the environment. And those which will emerge as a consequence of a number of factors. And those, according to our tool, PESTEL, have to do with 6 elements of the environment. And those are political variables and factors. This is where PESTEL got the P from. Economic, that's the E. Social variables, S. Technological, T. The second T is about environmental or ecological factors, and eventually legal factors. So in order for you to have a good understanding about the opportunities and threats in a polity, in a nation, that you will need to have a somewhat detailed understanding along those 6 dimensions. What exactly are you supposed to know regarding political variables? Well, I have prepared here a very short list of variables that you would like to have some information about. Do you know who that person is? His name is Robert Mugabe. Do you know who Robert Mugabe is? He's the president of a country called Zimbabwe. Well, this country, a few years ago, was known to be one of the most progressive and well-developed African countries. Well, not anymore. What happened when Robert Mugabe came into power was a very substantial shift in the way this country was governed. So there was a dramatic change in the political variables in this particular nation. So this kind of events should be of concern to you. So what are the chances that you as investors, as business woman or man, are expropriated by people who do not respect property rights, who take your investment and say, now it's mine? Well, political variables try to inform you about that kind of risks. And therefore, evidence about governmental stability and quality of political institutions will be of huge interest. We also know that freedom of press is positively correlated with the quality of governance. So this is a nice also proxy for quality of political institutions. What other things we usually care about here is corruption. Well, corruption has been thought to be one of the biggest deterrents of economic development. And even though there are discussions about whether corruption can be actually fought, or corruption elimination happens as a result of the stage of economic development, we still try to create that kind of sensitivity in our businessmen and women and students in particular, not to fall into the temptation and be part of that kind of behavior. The E of the PESTEL framework refers to the economic variables. And these are the usual suspects, such as growth rates, inflation rate, exchange rate, unemployment, credit availability, labor cost, and stock market trends. And those, of course, you will know quite a lot about because of your economics classes. So I don't feel the need to motivate your interest in describing the macro environment in terms of the economic variables at all. I just want to raise your sensitivity as to the very big number of indicators that exist that characterize economic development. So make sure that you have a full understanding of what is going on and include as many of those as you can in your own research. Well, and tonight we are here because we'd like to know a bit more about one particular variable of the macro environment and its influence on organizations and on future businesses. And that variable is culture. And it's very hard to do quantitative research with social and cultural variables. So what I have listed here are some ideas as to what kind of issues you might develop some sensitivity for. So there are some objectively measured proxies for social variables, such as the value that a nation places on education, the demographics related to the population size, growth rate, immigration and emigration, the sex and age distribution, the existence of minorities, and the ethnical composition of societies, the acceptance and existence of social classes, and other aspects that relate to the preference for saving versus spending and living on credit, the attitude toward service, which give such a great competitive advantage to nations that culturally have a lot of sensitivity to that. Filipinos, for example, are renowned, or Latin Americans are renowned to have a very deeply embedded cultural attitude, positive cultural attitude to service, whereas our Central and Eastern European cultures are not renowned precisely for this. We have recently included in our variables regarding the social state of the society, things related to lifestyles, and of course religion and religious beliefs fit here. We have two more aspects that has only recently entered into our understanding as major building blocks of the macro environment. And technology is one that has entered the stage very dramatically in the recent years with the development of the internet and information communication technologies. So this makes a big difference in today's world. You have good quantitative data on this, and information on research and development, spendings, access to the latest breakthroughs, even the number of patents that a nation files would be natural proxies for these technological variables. Environmental variables are of particular interest to you, because as you enter labor force, as you go and develop an increasingly global career, these issues will become more and more important. So attitudes towards recycling, green lifestyle, share of renewable energy, and weather and climate change have some issues in terms of how they're measured, but there is no question that they matter. So here the challenge is how we approach the quantitative side of the environmental variables, not about the appreciation of their importance. And eventually, one of the variables that have gained most weight in our characterization of national environments are the legal variables. Those variables that would most closely define the institutional makeup of a country. And I already told some of you about the Doing Business project of the World Bank that is trying to explicitly measure in a cross-country setting that burden or effectiveness of regulatory regimes across different countries and their impact on how easy or difficult is to do business in these environments. So legal factors and the role of the government as a regulator become really crucial nowadays, and I want you to think in terms of antitrust law, data protection, that is personal data protection, employment law, antitrust, and discrimination are aspects that would indicate the stage of societal maturity. And that will, so more or less sensitivity or more or less regulation and de facto enforcement along those areas will indicate a more or less mature institutional setup. So in a conclusion, what I have presented to you is a framework of structuring information about the country. And what I've told you that this information is important when structured along 6 main building blocks. One of these is culture. And I would like to continue the presentation or class and give the microphone to Professor Goksoy, who will show you how this national cultural environment actually infuses and translates into organizational environment, and she will help us understand the process in great detail. It's a gift, huh?
Okay. Hi, guys. Now let's talk about organizational culture. As you know that we are all from different countries. We have our own language, the way we talk, the way we dress, and the way we act. Now imagine that we are all from different countries but working in one company. That's the problem. Because what happens is whatever we learn in our childhood, experience in our adult life, we need to forget and now focus on organizational culture. The minute you enter the company, they will have their own personality. And that's what the social glue among employees. They will tell you what to do, how to do, what to dress, what to eat, how to behave, how to treat others in that organization. In normal circumstances, organizational culture is a solid personality. It doesn't change overnight. And we will see that we learn these kind of organizational culture through the events, through the language, the way they decorate their offices, the hierarchical level, they all will tell us what type of organizational culture we are talking in that company. And what happens is it's important because it teaches employees how to behave, how to reach their goals. So there will be one common way to speak, behave, and reach the goals. That's why it's important. The problem is, yes, it has pros and cons. The good part is we belong in a group that will share the same values. That's good because belonging to a group makes us more proud, more loyal, and more committed. Fine, but the problem with the other side is, if a personality doesn't change overnight, what happens if environment is changing and you need to change yourself also to adapt the new circumstances outside the business world? And your organizational culture needs to change. During mergers, during acquisitions, during change management, we see this dilemma a lot. Most of the popular reason why today change management doesn't go well in certain mergers and acquisitions, our number one reason is cultural change. Because organizations do not like to change their culture. That's their stable way of doing business. All of a sudden, you need to play around, and then you think, who am I now? So that's one of the reasons why you need to be careful with organizational change. One thing, it's good because it tells you how to do, what to do, belonging, and then you are different than the other company. We all watch Google, we all watch Facebook around, work environment. You see that they are different. They have their own way of behaving in that organizations. And now look at the culture. There will be so much research about organizational culture, and based on the research, each company will have these dimensions, high or low, doesn't matter, but they need to look. And when you look at it, some companies will be really high on creativity, risk-taking. They take risk and they increase their profit through risk-taking. Some companies will be slow motion. Again, attention to details. Some companies will focus only the big picture. Some will focus on details, analyze, look every little detail. Outcome orientation. Am I outcome oriented or process oriented? Is it important to reach my goals or the way I reach my goals? And then, some companies are really competitive. They will do highly competitive strategies. Some will be smoother. And again, team-oriented. Are we individually treated in that company? Will I be measured my performance through team or individual thing? So what happens is team orientation is important in today's business world because we know that in most of the companies now we go with team orientation more than individual. And people orientation. Am I really caring about my employees or am I taking care of others? So these are all different dimensions, but each organizational culture should have somehow some amount, either low or high or between, but they need to carry these kind of stuff. Oops, too much. And now, how do we create organizational culture? One thing is the founder. For example, Hyundai's founder, Mr. Young, is very well known with his discipline, his tough rules and regulations in his personal life. And when you go Hyundai, you will see the same thing. Founders will create the companies the way they look around. Their own personalities will shine in the organizations. Their personal values will be on the organization's value statement because this is their company, this is where they want to build their empire, and therefore foundations will create the culture. Then through the selection process, you know that we have interviews, we have tools like personality tests, culture fit tests. Through different instruments, we select the people that will fit in this value system. In most of the cases, these founders will choose the people similar to them. They will see that these people will have the intention to follow the rules, values, mission, and vision statements of the founders. So selection will be the first step. Then what we see is top management. They are the role models. They will behave the way it's wanted from the other employees. They will, for example, IKEA managers will most of the times fly economic class because they will tell their employees that in IKEA, we dress normal, no suits, easy life, nothing expensive, nothing exaggeration. That's what they are. And look at their products. Simple, useful, no exaggeration. So that's top management role, is being a role model to other employees, socialization. Every newcomer has to be a part in the socialization process. In most of the time, 3 to 6 months, each employee with a role model or coach, mentor, whatever they use in that company, will understand what the process is in this organization. They will teach them how to behave, how to accept the rules. So whatever background you have from your previous experiences, job experience especially, you will forget and learn the new culture. At the end, this culture will be carried to generation to generation. In literature, you will see different types of organizational culture. We can't say one is better than the other one. We could only say strong or weak cultures, depending on how much the values are shared and appreciated. When you look at these items, you will see that in most of the times they are matrix design. And one of the study comes from Deal and Kennedy, very popular. In most of the books, you will see these three grouping. Here, as you will see, the degree of risk and then the feedback speed. For example, for process cultures, as you see, degree of risk is low and the feedback is slow because this is most of the time bureaucratic organizations where they really don't know how to give feedback because everything is so slow motion. They really don't take too much risk. They just want to complete the task. If you go tough guy macho culture, oppositely, you will see that the degree of risk is high. They move everything quickly, and the feedback will be quick because they want to see the result as soon as possible. And if you look at the other classification, Handy says that there are 4 different ones. And the circle one, as you will see, there's one man in the center. In most of the times, small entrepreneurship or family-oriented businesses will have that type of culture because one person will be on the top. He or she will be the leader. He or she will be she or he will be making the decisions, and the others will follow. If you look at the second one, it looks like a Greek temple. There, the legs of that house, if we call it temple, they are the functions of the organization. Every function will have their own goals, and the top, the roof, will be senior management, very short power, nothing exaggerated. They will direct those. Task, you know that matrix design structures as today, everyone joins to a task or project. When you're done, you quit, and then you go to the next one. And the last one will be for entrepreneurs. He is one of the guru in cross-cultural studies. What he believes that there are different type of organizational culture based on hierarchical style and the task orientation. For example, in family ones, as you will know, Latin American countries, what they do in family-oriented, one person will be in the power, and management by subjective. It's all about whom you know in these kind of companies. Guided missile, it's management by mission. You have a project, it's all about reaching your objectives, and you work hard for those kind of stuff. And AFL will be in most of the German based cultures. Germanic, it's believed that the organization will have tall structure. Their power is important, but also you respect the authority. So these are all different versions, but the main idea is who holds the power, how the business is done in the organization. And now you will know 3 important people. One is Hofstede. What Hofstede believes that there are 5 dimensions. He did a huge research, as you will know that in 50 countries on IBM employees, what they found us was there were 5 dimensions that you will find in common in every nation. Why we care about this? As you will understand from the titles, for example, individualism and collectivism. In these countries, individualism is more important than working together. They like to value individual values, they like to work by themselves, and they want the performance evaluation go through individually. So when we look at this kind of stuff, we apply it to the organization. This is a national study, but you can use it in the organizational level. For example, power distance. In the countries where there's high power distance, it means that you respect the power. You accept that there will be unfairness, unequalness among the members of that society. And like China, you see this kind of stuff. And there are certain, in his study, he gives points to each country. Every country will have 5 points depending on these titles. And if, for example, United States is high on individualism, and if you go to a company in the United States, you will see that those people enjoy to work individually. If you go to a company where high power distance exists, you know that in those companies, there will be a CEO, then there will be other managers, there will be layers of managers, and you will know that there's a salary difference between those people because power is accepted, you respect, you never question that power. Same thing with uncertainty. Those countries don't like question marks. They want to see clear future. And therefore, those countries, companies, you will see that there will be so many rules and regulations. Everything will be followed by rules because they don't like uncertainty. They want everything under control. Same thing goes like this, like long term will be about using time. If you're a long-term oriented country, those countries will value future. They will save their money. On the other hand, if you are coming from a short term, then this means that it's all about today. So you will create your own strategies to take care of today, and therefore you will use your savings, just enjoy what you have today. And then the next one will be to entrepreneurs, and he did a similar study. As you see, 55 countries, many employees, and what he found is similar to the first one, but he has 7 dimensions. If you look at the first one, you will see that it's about rules or regulation. In these countries, and the companies in those countries will value either rules or freedom. It's for them, autonomy is important. I want to do what I want to do. Individuals, same thing. Should I work individually or collectively in teams? Nature and emotion, how much emotions I need to show. You know that in certain countries, we talk loudly, we show our emotions. In some countries, silence means peace. You need to be quiet, you don't show your emotions. So what happens is, in those countries, if you are emotional, then this means that in that organization, you are free to show your emotions, and if there's something you could voice and then tell your opinion. Specific and diffuse is how much freedom you want from your work. In most of the times in today's business world, we know that we try to keep our private life to ourselves. We would like to balance work and family life. In those countries, what happens is sometimes your privacy will be controlled. Sometimes you control your own family relationships. And then the 5th one will be about proving yourself. In those countries where achievement is high, you work so hard. You are known with your performance. In the second one, it's about who you are. Who is your father? What's your last name? Which school you are coming from? So it's your family power that will bring you success. And the other one is about time. How am I using my time? Am I using it generously? Am I doing one thing at a time? Or am I dividing my time for different tasks? It's about using time. The last one is about environment. How much environment I'm using, how much input I'm taking, am I abusing it? Or the second one is, am I the one who controls it? So these are all different dimensions, and depending on your scores on these elements, the company will create their own culture. And the last one will be Shine's. Shine worked over these 2 other research, and what he found is in every culture and in every organizational culture, you will have 3 layers. Artifacts are the ones you see: dress code, the jokes, the language, the pictures, everything. It's seen, it's there. Exposed are the ones: strategies, goal, mission, vision. It's told to you. And then the last one will be the assumptions. This is unconscious. You accept them as it is. You do not question them. And they all support one another. In the organizations, if they have different artifacts that, for example, on Fridays, it's a free Friday. It is an artifact. You see it, you use it. Values, they teach you what type of values they appreciate in that organization. This one is like under the iceberg. You really don't question, don't go deeply. But this is the core part of the values. And therefore, they will all support one another. If one is missing, then there is a problem. And then what Shine says is, when you go to a company, look around. There will be always a signal to teach you what type of organizational culture they have. It could be heroes. They will always talk about those people. In Ford company, you will have these stories because Henry Ford will always make different behaviors or different speeches that will be remembered for decades. And the language in certain companies like IBM, they will use short version of languages because it's, they don't have time to talk but do the action, and therefore ATB will mean something for them but not for us. So when you look around, there will be always clues, and that's how we learn organizational culture, eventually accept it. And why we care about this, as we all see that culture will bring different values, objectives, and goals. And what we do is, in the organizational level, we want you to understand that the culture is not something changeable. The minute you start working in a company, you have to understand the concept and then do the way they want it. And for managers, why it's important is, first of all, national culture and organizational culture has to be hand by hand. And therefore, you need to understand that you have to respect the diversity. You need to respect their values. Another thing is, when you're fitting your employees into your organization, you need to understand that their cultural background needs to fit the organizational culture. If you're coming from an aggressive culture, if the company culture is soft, you cannot match. You won't be able to function, be motivated, and be happy because the culture mismatch will cause you dilemmas in the organization. This is not simple process because culture that we learn and we don't question, and therefore what happens is you need to coordinate all the activities towards that organizational culture. In conclusion, the national culture will always affect the organizational culture because that's the dominant culture. That's the values are taken, that's the attitudes taken, and therefore organizational culture will adjust themselves through the nations they are. The only problem we have in this global world, all the companies are working in different regions, and therefore their organizational culture needs to fit in all these different regions' needs, values, and missions. Thank you. Now Jana will continue from here. Should I give you this
one? Okay. So now you heard a lot about theory, and I'm going to continue with theory, but I will also try to put in some empirical evidence. And what I'm trying to tell you today is how those three factors, individualism, you just heard of it from Asli, is a cultural value, role models, and self-efficacy influence entrepreneurial behavior. Why should you study entrepreneurial behavior? Why is it important? Well, on the one hand side, we know that entrepreneurship matters for economic development because it creates value. On the other hand, we also know that not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. So trying to figure out what are the factors that make an individual become an entrepreneur is important, not only for us as researchers, but also for political people who want to try to design some kind of programs to incentivize entrepreneurship. There are a whole bunch of theories out there who try to explain what makes people become entrepreneurs. One important research stream among them is the one that focuses on entrepreneurial intentions here. What is entrepreneurial intention? Basically, it captures the motivation of an individual to undertake a certain behavior. In this case, to start a business venture. So it tells you how much you're willing to do in order to set up a business. And among all the different models that are there, trying to explain what influences in these intentions, they all have two things in common. On the one hand side, there's perceived desirability. What does it mean? If I think it's a good thing to become an entrepreneur, I'm more likely to become one, or I'm more likely to want to become one. And then there's feasibility or self-efficacy. If I think I can do it, I'm much more likely to be wanting it. So that's the picture here, and I can tell you I have a 2-year-old daughter. She thinks she can move a car, she will try to do it. And the same thing happens with entrepreneurship. For our research that I am undertaking at the moment, I'm focusing on this part. Why did I call it sociocultural context? Because I'm trying to understand how role models influence in this relationship. We know already that if I think I can do it, I'll try to do it. But there are factors who will influence how much this really matters for this. So how many of you have parents or brothers, sisters, uncles, or aunts who have a business? Quite a few. And how many of those who have relatives who have a business think they, at some point in their life, want to become an entrepreneur as well? Not all of them, but quite a few of them. And that's something that's already known. A role model, and that's what basically is a family member who is an entrepreneur. A role model for entrepreneurship helps me to want to become an entrepreneur. Why does it do it? Well, there are several reasons. One is because you can discuss with the role model, or you can ask for advice. The other one is the role model can encourage you, can tell you, you can do that. It's hard, but you can do it. And they can give you resources that you need to undertake such a venture. And the third one is observation. You probably know this guy, and you probably know the show. I don't know if they have it here in Bulgaria, the Entrepreneurial Apprentice. Well, there were studies that showed that just watching that, people want to become an entrepreneur more likely than without watching it. So what we expect is basically knowing an entrepreneur will make this even stronger. At the same time, I also talked about individualism. And Asli already talked about it. What it is a value of one of the traits of national culture. How can you define it? Think of China. You've probably seen Chinese or Japanese tourists everywhere. Are they ever there individually? Usually you see them in groups, right? Now think about an American or a German. They don't appear in groups most of the times. Usually they're individuals. And if you think in that terms, you can kind of understand what it means to be living in an individual country or living in a collectivistic country. In a collectivistic country, what matters is the group. And you don't want to stand out of the group. You rely on the group for valuing what you're doing. The group is what tells you to do. Whereas in an individualistic country, you rely on yourself. The group doesn't matter as much. It's there, of course, and it will matter to some aspects, but not as much as in a country like China. So how can this influence entrepreneurship? Well, if you think of entrepreneurship as something where individuals need to stand out, it is likely that people living in individualistic countries might have higher intentions of starting a business than people living in a collectivistic country. At the same time, and that's something that has been proven in most empirical research, individualistic countries, higher entrepreneurial intentions. But what we try to understand is how living in an individualistic country, influences the other things that we just saw. This relationship, the feasibility and the entrepreneurial intention. So what did we use? I said we did empirical research. We used something that's called Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. It's an endeavor that at the moment I think has 85 countries, including, where every single year, they go to the field and ask minimum 2,000 individuals about their entrepreneurial intentions, activities, what are factors that drive them to go into entrepreneurship, and all these kind of things. So we use that data, and then there's the data from Hofstede. You just heard of it. We merged them, and based on that, we did some empirical, we applied some statistical techniques and tried to find out what are exactly the influences of each of these variables, and especially what are the interaction between them, meaning that how does one influence the other? So what did we find? There's something that's very interesting. The red numbers are individualistic countries, and the blue colors are collectivistic countries. What did we find here? You can see here's a group who know an entrepreneur. 48, 32. So much more people in a collectivistic country know an entrepreneur. Again, the group matters. They know more people, and it matters more for them. But what is more important even is this. So if they know an entrepreneur, they believe much more that they have the capabilities of becoming an entrepreneur. They believe that they're able to become an entrepreneur, as we can see here. And that is much stronger in collectivistic countries than in individualistic countries. So what did we find in the end? On one thing is, believing that I'm able to do, to start a venture, yes. There are higher intentions to become an entrepreneur. If you know a role model, we just saw it. You also are more likely to become an entrepreneur, or at least to have the intention to become an entrepreneur. And that's something surprising, as it contradicts earlier findings. Living in a collectivistic country, in an individualistic country, lowers entrepreneurial intentions. When we look at the interaction, meaning how does one variable influence the other, then we found other things. One is that what we already could imagine, if you know a role model, you're more likely to believe that you can become an entrepreneur, that you're capable of doing so. Because of the advice you receive from the role model, because of the encouragement, because of seeing that the other person can do it, so why shouldn't I be able to do it as well? So that becomes even stronger. Knowing a role model and thinking I'm capable of, I will more likely become an entrepreneur. What about the, that was too fast. What about the influence of the culture, which was one of the things that was mentioned before? Well, culture matters. Not always, and that's another big finding. It doesn't matter when we talk about role models. Anywhere in the world, role models matter. It is important to know an entrepreneur. It makes you wanting to become an entrepreneur. But it does matter, individualism or collectivism, when you talk about your belief to be able to become an entrepreneur, to have the capabilities. In the sense that when you live in a collectivistic country, in China, remember the group? I don't want to stand out. If you live there, then there is you have lower self-efficacy, meaning that you don't think you're able to do that as easily. So you don't want to become that much of an entrepreneur. And how does it compare? China, the US, taking as two examples. If you live in China, you're less likely to think that you're able to do the entrepreneurial stuff as if you live in the US. Does that make sense for you? And if we look how all of these come together, well, we find that if you live in an individualistic country and know an entrepreneur and you believe you're able to do what it takes to become an entrepreneur, when you have all of these three things, that's when your intentions are highest. So what can we take out of here? Well, usually policymakers are taking into account the regulation. Veneta already mentioned the doing business. That's what most policymakers have on the monitor, regulations. How do I do so it doesn't take as long to register a business, or I don't have to pay that much taxes? Well, what we are saying is don't look at the regulation only. Look at the individual as well. And one thing that you can do there is if you have entrepreneurs, try to get those entrepreneurs be known so they can function as role models. Then you might have more entrepreneurs in your country.
Well, we'll now switch to the Q&A part of the session. So we'd like to take some questions from you, and they will be addressed to anybody here, to the three of us or to one or two of us. And I will repeat the question after the person has stated it, so that we can have the proper sound for the video. So we have a bit of time, and let's benefit from this. So questions in relation to what you're exposed to as information. Anything that comes to your mind? You go.
A question to you. You say that you're doing the research on this basis. Do you think it can become a course in AUBG? Does it have potential for that?
You mean a course based on culture?
Yeah.
So the question is, do you think this topic has potential to become a course in its own right? And well, I think Asli, you might. Okay, I'll give the micro.
If I'm not mistaken, there was a course given like this because we wanted to do something like culture, and I think Mark is giving. Yeah. Isn't it? There is one. There is one.
Yes, you go.
Yeah. So the question is to you. You were talking about PESTEL analysis. So what are the practical implications? I mean, does some country use this, or some organization is using it to, assess the country's?
Yes, PESTEL analysis is very useful in international strategy when companies try to assess the internationalization of their businesses. They need to take very good care of the environment as described here. Why I'm saying that? Traditionally, corporations, when they realize they need to go international or global. The way they approach outside opportunities consists of looking into the market size and growth potential. That is the economic side of it. What we know from empirical investigation and case studies is that those companies that underestimate the other elements of the PESTEL analysis pay a very high price. Walmart will be renowned for a company that has reached remarkable levels of profitability in a very tough, unattractive industry, in Michael Porter's terminology. They are remarkably profitable, but they are remarkably profitable in their hindsight in the US. Their international strategy is very ill-crafted, and they had to exit several markets where they wanted to be present. For example, Argentina is one of the markets where they failed. Germany is one of the biggest failures of Walmart. Why did they fail? If they have made something like PESTEL analysis that will focus on aspects different from market size and GDP per capita and market growth, they could have realized that in terms of social values, regulations, environmental requirements, doing business in the US is a very, very different thing from doing business in these other countries. Therefore, well-done PESTEL analysis is really a fundamental factor for understanding a foreign environment. And it's very helpful as well for understanding your own domestic environment while it is continuously changing. Therefore, I don't have any doubts about the practical implications of that analytical tool. Other questions? You go.
Yes, I understand this was a statistic on which countries, depending on their culture, such as individualism or group culture, people are more likely to become entrepreneurs. But my question is, in which countries are more likely entrepreneurs to succeed based on their cultures? For example, an entrepreneur is able to succeed in a collective country or individual country. Is there something that...
I have my own opinion about that, but I'll refer the question to Jana first, and if you want, I can build a bit on
Exactly.
On your own views.
So your question is really, really interesting because, as I told you, I focused for the moment being on entrepreneurial intentions. And intentions, even though they're one of the best predictors of behavior, they don't tell us anything so far whether the people will succeed or not. So one of the things that will have to be looked at in succeeding in research that I'm going to undertake in the future is whether those findings are true also for entrepreneurs that say that they want to grow a lot, that they will employ some kind of innovative products, which is a better indicator of success. The problem with the GEM data is that even though they take every year the survey, it's not a panel in the sense that they ask you today, this year, and they will ask you again next year and the year after. So you cannot tell how the intention really translates later into behavior and whether this behavior translates into success. At least for these data, you can't. There certainly will be research that tries to understand that, but that research usually is not on an international scale because it's just outrageously expensive doing that. But you said you had some ideas.
Yes, I'd like to add to what you just said from a slightly different perspective. Well, the thing is that entrepreneurial success rate and entrepreneurial behavior are not well understood beyond the areas where these kind of activities are most prominent. That is, we know what is the success rate on average in Silicon Valley. We know what is the success rate on average among the startups in Tel Aviv and the other big entrepreneurial clusters. Whether we know something about the effect of culture and which traits of the national culture contribute to success or failure, we don't. We don't understand why we have more entrepreneurial success stories in one place than in another based on cultural explanations. We have anecdotes, we have stories. So for example, if you have had a look at a Startup Nation, which is about explaining why Israel is a nation of entrepreneurs, it draws on the history of the country and therefore on some specific cultural traits of that particular group of people. Well, in this sense, it is essentially path dependent because you cannot replicate Jewish history anywhere in the world. So what is the practical implication from understanding the history behind Silicon Valley or Tel Aviv's hubs, right? There is not kind of a learning thing. There is not a practical lesson besides us understanding what happened to them. This would not imply that we will have any predictive power to explain our own success or failure. Okay? Other questions? You go.
I have a question to Professor Schmutzler. As I understood, in individualistic countries and both in socially oriented countries, we have both negative and positive sides for the startup of the entrepreneurial some idea. So for instance, in individualistic country, we are like the self-efficacy is high because there is no group and we don't have to attach to someone, so we're just free to go in and act. And in social oriented countries, yeah, we have our friends, our relatives, and they can tell us, be our role models. So is there any activities already taking place in the world that combine these two things, two extremes, and it brings a good atmosphere for the start of the entrepreneurial activities? Thank you.
I think the question was, are there some actions that would follow out of the practical implications that you're mentioning, that is exposing role models in certain cultures that you have found to work better as a motivator, as an explanatory variable of entrepreneurial behavior?
Well, for the moment being, I'm not aware of any government program that tries to implement exposing individuals to entrepreneurial role models. But if you think of the TV show, The Apprentice, that's one example. It might not be the most effective example because an interaction, a direct interaction with another entrepreneur is likely to help you more. But it is one example. Whether they're government programs, to be honest, I'm not aware of anything, but there could be. And that's absolutely worth looking into whether there are already governments that try to do that. And your question was combining collectivistic and individualistic traits. The problem here is that you have nations and they have certain cultures. And as Asli already mentioned, these cultures, they don't change fast. And national cultures even less so than organizational cultures. So to try to mix collectivistic values and individualistic values, I don't think that will happen anywhere. It's rather, and that's the implication for the policymakers, you need to take into account what your country is like, and you need to adapt your policies to these cultures. So, as I said, role models, they work everywhere. But there might be other policies that won't work in all the countries in the same way. As we've seen, the self-efficacy has different implications depending on whether you live in a collectivistic or an individualistic country. So if you see that, even though that's something that policies directly cannot influence that easily, if you aim at that, you need to take into account, are you in a collectivistic country? Does it matter more here? Or are you in an individualistic country? Does it matter more there? So basically the idea behind all of that is you as a policymaker need to take into account where are you doing the policies. You just can't take what worked in China and adapt it here, or take what worked in the US and adapt it to here. You need to adapt it. It's not a copy-paste. Did that answer your question?
I have a follow-up on that, and I just want to tell you that there is an organization with which we have been at AUBG working with, and it's called Junior Achievement. And Junior Achievement is a very big impact in among school kids. They expose them, they go to school, I mean high schools, and they expose them to role models. They bring those entrepreneurs to the classroom, and they ask this role model, successful entrepreneur, to tell the kids their life story. And more or less along this same philosophy, we have tried to create an elective course on entrepreneurship here. So the idea is very much following what you're seeing as an insight. It's not so much the content, it's the inspiration you get by seeing role models and identifying with them and just believing your own talents and knowledge would be just enough to try it. So following the role model kind of philosophy is behind the Junior Achievement existence. This is an organization that has been around for very many decades, so they have a very well-established philosophy about the role of role models for entrepreneurial stimulation. Well, we have time to probably take one more question, and then we will do the closing part of today's event. Any questions? Yes? So the question is, which country is standing closer to become the Silicon Valley? So shall I answer? Of Europe. I would say Germany.
Well, coming from Germany, I will have to say Germany, right? No, well, Veneta already mentioned Israel. Israel is one of the biggest countries in terms of entrepreneurship. Of all the other countries, I know that a lot of them try to do it. There was something similar to a Silicon Valley in Paris, but that fell apart because of different factors. So what is the message? Trying to become Silicon Valley, again, is trying to do the same as the Americans did. Maybe that won't work. Take into consideration who you are as a nation and what kind of factors you have as a nation that might influence positively or might influence negatively into entrepreneurship. And then try to take up on that and invent your own Silicon Valley, but don't try to be Silicon Valley. That is likely not to be working.
Well, I'd like to say a few words at the very end of the event. So first, thank you very much for attending this experimental session of Balkansky Panica Institute for Advanced Study event. The event was videotaped by AUBGTalks, and in a few weeks it will be available online. So in case you want to watch some parts of it, you can refer to their webpage and check the contents. They are freely available there. So I'd like to thank AUBGTalks for doing this for us and helping us with the visibility and the support to our teaching process and your learning process. The second thing that I'd like to announce is that you guys will be kindly asked about your thoughts and reaction in anonymous survey, which will be emailed by me and Professor Goksoy, and we would like to hear your very sincere reaction so that we know what do you think about this format, what do you like, and what do you think needs to be improved, changed, or even canceled altogether. We'll very much appreciate that you spend the time to answer our 6-question survey. So thank you very much for being here, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
This program is brought to you by AUBG Talks. For more, please visit us at aubg.bg/talks.